This video is an introduction to Paradise Lost by John Milton. It will cover themes to be found within the text in Paradise Lost, as well as some background biographical information on John Milton. Milton was born in London in 1608. He is a 17th century writer. He went to Christ College in Cambridge. He did extensive traveling in Italy and France, wrote poetry, returned to England to teach his nephews, and was a part of the Civil War, which involved political religious controversies and the highly supported Oliver Cromwell's wealth. He married Mary Powell. She left him months later and did not return for 3 years, and their two daughters were then born. He was a Secretary of Foreign Trade. He had a son that was born in 1651, and then days after his third daughter was born, his wife died, and a month later after that, his son died, and he also lost his sight. He then married Catherine Woodcock 2 years later. So Milton obviously had a very difficult life with the losing of his children, his wife, and his sight. And the losing of his sight is something that is going to have a heavy influence upon his writing. Because he was involved in such high political controversies, he was placed under house arrest and released 6 months later. He then married Elizabeth Minchell and then retired from public life. After he published the first edition of Paradise Lost, which included 10 chapters, the material was subsequent to the fall that material is missing from this edition, and the concern to justify the ways of God to man is evident, as is Milton's conviction that despite the fall of the Commonwealth and the restoration of the monarchy, political justice can be achieved in this world. So basically, the book can be viewed in different ways. It can be looked at as an explanation of scriptures. It can coincide with scriptures. However, it is not to be replaced. It is not to replace the scriptures, but it can also parallel the political controversies of his day. In 1670, he published Paradise Lost. His goal was to do for the English language what Homer, Virgil, and Dante did for Greek, Latin, and Italian. Homer writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, Virgil writing the Aeneid, and Dante writing the Inferno. So he wanted to give the English an epic poem as well. He was highly influenced by Mary Shelley, C.S. Lewis, and William Blake. He does not hesitate to ask, if the world was created by a good, just, and loving God, why is there little evidence of goodness and justice in the world? And also, what does it mean for humankind to be created in the image of that God? And how does humanity endure in a fallen world? So these are very large questions that Milton focuses on throughout his writing. The poem is written in blank verse, meaning that it is unrhymed, which many people of that time did not want to accept it because they have been used to things rhyming, and this was very out of the ordinary. He follows the common characteristics of an epic as established by Homer. He employs the common use of stating his theme and invoking the muse or higher power to help him throughout the story. In this case, the muse is going to be the Holy Spirit. He opens in medias res, or in the middle, and he took the story of the fall of man from the book of Genesis and the war in heaven from Revelation. He was influenced by the Spenserian tradition of religious poetry, meaning that he incorporated iambic pentameter with a final line of iambic hexameter and patterned his verses after Shakespeare's unrhymed iambic pentameter. So even though it is written in blank verse, there is a logical pattern to his writing. You may want to, as with the Aeneid and other works that you have written, it is always helpful to create a list of characters or a family tree, if you will, so that you can keep up with new people that are introduced throughout your reading. God is the omniscient, all-knowing creator of heaven and earth, and the Son is the Son in heaven. He has not yet come down to the earth as Jesus Christ. He will volunteer to give his life as a ransom for man's sin. And if there's one thing that can be stressed throughout this reading, it will be very easy. It will be easier to read if you do not read this as a substitution of the scriptures. If you merely read it as a text And that way you can view the characters that, even though they are a part of Christian religion, view them as merely characters. That way you will be able to separate the Trinity and not view it as one entity, but rather as separate characters, and it will make the understanding of the text easier. Adam was the first man created by God and placed in the garden, and he is forbidden to eat of the tree of knowledge. Eve is the first woman created by God from Adam's rib. She is also forbidden to eat of the tree, and she is tempted by the serpent and then convinces Adam to eat of the fruit. And then we have the archangel Satan, or Lucifer, who is cast out of heaven for leading a group of angels in a revolt against God. He is the ruler of hell after the fall, disguises himself as the serpent, and deceives Adam and Eve. Now, some of these characters are some that are created by Milton simply for the text. We have Mulciber, the architect of Pandemonium, which is Satan's capital in hell. And some of the names you may recognized from the Bible, but Milton has personified them here in his book. Beelzebub, the fallen angel who is the second in command, he speaks last at the devilish council and convinces the fallen angels to accept Satan's scheme of revenge towards God, which will involve the destruction of man. Moloch proposes that he and all of the other angels in hell fight an open war in heaven to try to reverse their state. Belial is a fallen angel who argues that it is better to exist in hell and than to not exist at all. He fears God. If they anger him, he may be destroyed completely. And then Mammon suggests to Satan's council that the fallen angels dismiss all thoughts of war against heaven and retain their freedom in hell. Sin is Satan's daughter, who was born full grown from his head. Sin was once alluring to the angels in heaven, but is now repulsive and ugly as she guards the gates of hell with her son Death. And sin is basically brought forth from Satan's mind in much of the same way that Athena, the goddess of wisdom, was brought forth from Zeus's mind. She sprung forth like a thought, and basically that is what sin has done. She has sprung forth as a thought from Satan. Now, when Satan and sin mix, it results in death, which is very creative on behalf of Milton. It was born from the union of Satan and his daughter Sin, which is basically a terrible fallen state anyway. Death in turn rapes sin, producing yelling monsters, the fruit of the second incestuous act. So it is a continual degradation. Chaos, it personifies confusion and disorder. And then Uriel is an archangel who is nearest to God's throne and is ready to serve God. Gabriel, one of God's archangels who guards Adam and Eve. Abdiel, an angel who defies Satan in the war in heaven. He stays faithful to God, although he is tempted to follow Satan. Michael leads God's angels in battle in the war, instructs Adam after the fall. Raphael, a six-winged angel who has been sent by God from heaven to protect Adam and Eve and to warn them of the impending danger by Satan. And then Urania, the classical muse, the muse of astronomy, adopted by the Christian poets for divine inspiration. Some of the major themes that you can look for as you're reading is the theme of justice, freedom or free will, chaos or choice and consequence, faith and obedience, knowledge and ignorance, the human condition, deception and manipulation, judgment versus grace, and also passion and judgment is another one to look at. And then truth versus myth. So these are things that it would be very helpful for you to take note of, to try to remember them. And as in your reading, if you see an example or a situation that supports this, to make note, and that again will aid in your research paper and essay writing as well.